Hi. Okay, so welcome to my first LinkedIn live stream. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to talk to you about my new book, Understanding and Dealing with Everyday Racism, and the Six Stages Framework. Hi. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about my book and really kind of to share with you some of the concepts within my book. Um, and and today we're really going to be focusing on the six stages and also talking about the prejudice racism spectrum. Okay, so I'm just making sure that this is still working. Um, yeah, so let's get started then. So I want to share with you just kind of what the six stages are, and and also to talk about what the basic concepts are to the six stages framework. So one of the key concepts is around building bridges of empathy and really kind of the importance of being able to consider our relationship with others, not only those who are the same as us but also those who are different from us. And so a key concept is very much around building bridges of empathy, and another concept is around perspective taking, being able to put yourself in someone's shoes and really kind of you know consider what life is like from their perspective. And it's really important to kind of support people to kind of to consider the different viewpoints from other people's perspectives and from other people's lives. And another core concept is around caves of privilege and coming out of caves of privilege. And I will be talking about this in much more detail in future presentations. But it's really, again, it's a key concept within the book. I always say that when you come to my sessions, it's important to come with an open mind, but also to come to be prepared to get uncomfortable. As I've said before, this work is not easy. It takes a certain level of commitment, and that commitment is really around kind of examining ourselves and looking at where we are in terms of this area. So how well do we understand the experiences of those who are different? How well do we understand how racism manifests in different places? I was reading a post just today about someone who's just written a book about racism within schools. So for those of you who work within the education system, what is your understanding of how racism manifests within, as say, the school setting? So yeah, so really kind of talking about the key concepts, but really kind of trying to introduce to you what the six stages are. So the stages, as I've said before, they run on two axes: the positive axis and the negative axis. And 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 the two first stages, plus one and plus two, and also minus one and minus two, really kind of mirror each other. So they really kind of describe people who are kind of in denial, and people who really kind of have that lack of awareness of what racism is. And to a certain extent, for some of them, they really don't want to know what racism is. So stage one is kind of unaware, and people will often present as kind of silent and in denial when these issues are raised. And stage two is where people are dismissive and avoidant of the issues. And they really kind of want to talk about anything other than issues of, racial inequity or racial injustice. And then, just kind of focusing on the positive axis for now, stage three is where people are becoming more aware of the issues of race and how racism manifests. They're getting a better understanding of the impact of what racism is and why it's important to kind of consider these issues and to be able to to actually make changes in this area. So there's a kind of a growing awareness, becoming aware of differences and racism, and really kind of beginning to question not only what their role, what one's own individual role is, but also questioning how racism manifests more widely within our communities, within society, and also within our own kind of individual experiences of experiencing racism. And stage four is where people become much more open to learning. So they're open to learning and having more meaningful conversations and being able to challenge not only their own perceptions in this area, but also those of others. It's really important kind of just to reiterate that the six stages framework is designed not only for white people, it's designed for everybody. So, the basic premise within the six stages framework is really the fact that, racism exists in different forms, and that we're all somewhere on the journey in terms of exploring, our own understanding of racism. But also we're also on kind of kind of different stages in exploring our biases and where we are in terms of the discrimination and the prejudice we may show to others who are different. So that applies to not only, as I said, white people, it applies to us all. So, I think, discrimination and racism can exist in different ways for different people. Obviously, the kind of the main definitions around racism, involve power, right? So it's about, they talk about, power, and they talk about, when we talk about structural racism, and people will often argue that, well, actually, black people and ethnic minorities cannot be racist because obviously, there isn't that kind of that power dynamic there. The starting point of the six stages framework is really about encouraging everyone to be aware of their own biases and really kind of getting everyone to explore where they are in terms of their journey in terms of this area. I strongly believe that it's only by doing this that we can actually support everyone to engage fully in this work. Because currently I think what happens is that when we talk about racism and when we talk about discrimination, people tend to go off in silos. People become very, very defensive. And, you often get, comments like, well, are you actually calling me racist? Or are you suggesting that I may be racist? So immediately conversations close down and no one wants to talk. The six stages framework provides a structured way of entering into these conversations. So by encouraging that exploration of bias, by encouraging that exploration of discrimination, which everyone can do, it basically makes it kind of gives us permission to enter into these conversations. Conversations which people usually may be inclined to close down. So, it's kind of encouraging everyone to explore their biases and to think about where they are in their journey in terms of understanding differences and how, prejudice and racism manifest. The six stages framework has been adapted to other areas of discrimination. So, on some of my other live streams, I talk about, very much kind of looking at how we apply the six stages framework in terms of, other discriminations. So whether it be disability, gender differences, or even kind of things around kind of violence towards women. And, you can watch one of my previous live streams to get more detail in terms of that. Okay, so let's move on then. So as I've said, this really is kind of an opportunity just to introduce to you, kind of, some of the concepts within my book. In some of the seminars, one of the key things I usually get people to do is, an activity called Check My Biases. So let's do that now. So, it's really kind of an encouragement for self-reflection. So think back to your childhood, when you first met someone who was different. What were the thoughts that went through your mind? What did you think, if you can remember back to those days? And most people can, because, that first point of meeting someone who's different is something which stays within our memory. So, what were your thoughts? What are your stereotypes now, and what are some of your biases? And when did you become aware of your stereotypes and biases? Take some time to think about, what's influenced your stereotypes and biases. What's shaped them, and where have they come from? We often talk about, how children, at a very early age do not discriminate. But then obviously that discrimination and bias builds up, through either, their experiences, in terms of kind of the key people around them, or through social media, or whatever their experiences may be. So what's shaped and influenced your stereotypes and biases? Has anyone ever challenged you about this? And if so, what have they said? And how did you respond? And it's a really interesting activity because often when I'm doing the Eventbrite seminars, people will talk quite openly about the first time they met someone who was different, the first time they became aware of their biases. Okay, so just to recap then, the Six Stages framework, it's really designed as a personal and developmental program, and also an organizational tool. And it's one where really kind of I'm inviting people on a journey to explore not only how their individual biases and discriminations show up, but also to think about how these show up within their workplace and within their organization. And so it's possible for individuals to locate where they are in terms of their journey. And everyone's unique, everyone is different. So it's about working out where are you on your journey, and how can you be supported to move forward? How can we support you to actually explore your biases and to think about how you move forward in terms of that journey? So essentially, what action do you need to take to progress, in terms of improving, how you are in terms of those stages? Okay, and as I've said, the stages can be applied to other areas of discrimination. So we're not just talking about racism and experience of racism, but we can also talk about other areas of difference. And I really believe that the intersectionality and the ability to explore differences and our experiences of differences and how we deal with differences, that intersectionality is really, is really important in the, in this work and in this area. So another concept I want to introduce, and another, area which I talk about within my book, is the prejudice, racism, equity spectrum. And I'm just going to say a little bit about that now, and then I'll talk about it in more detail in future conversations. But the basic premise of the prejudice, racism, equity spectrum is really that is one of the fact that racism, in my view, is not a binary thing. We often talk about racism being black and white, but far from it. I consider racism to be a spectrum. And so you're not just talking about black and white people, you're not talking about the experiences in terms of binary, but you're looking at racism as a wider spectrum. And when you get an opportunity to look at my book, one of the things I encourage people to do is to think about, to really kind of consider that we are all somewhere on that spectrum, and we are all somewhere, in terms of kind of, how our biases and prejudices show up. So it's a spectrum which enables us to chart, kind of how those show up. And a key concept I introduced, within this is really kind of, a concept around kind of negative automatic thoughts, which, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with. So, and I often say that, we all have negative automatic thoughts in lots of different areas. But, these negative automatic thoughts also appear when we're dealing with people who are different. So what negative automatic thoughts go through your head, and how do you spot them, and how do you deal with them? Because as I say, it's something that we all experience. So the prejudice, racism, equity spectrum, is really something I introduced because I really strongly believe that we need to stop just talking about extremes when we talk about racism. We need to stop going to extremes. We need to stop kind of going into silos and into corners. So, we in order to understand extreme behaviors and racism, it's important to understand what happens earlier on the prejudice, racism, equity spectrum. So it's only by understanding how those behaviors show up on that spectrum, and the language which people use in terms of, kind of on that spectrum in terms of racism. It's only by understanding some of that earlier behavior and some of that earlier language that we can fully understand how racism shows up in our individual lives, but also within our organizations. So we need to map out not only our thoughts, our feelings and behaviors, not only, our behaviors, but also our verbal interactions and non-verbal interactions. How are they showing up on the prejudice, racism spectrum? How do we enable, ourselves as individuals to understand how that shows up for us? But more importantly, as senior leaders within organizations, how do we support our workforce to understand where they are, not only in terms of the 6 stages framework, but also to understand, how their biases are showing up in terms of the prejudice, racism, equity spectrum. We all need to be able to engage in this work and to really kind of identify, some of these behaviors and think about, how we can, how they're showing up, but also how we can challenge them more. Okay, so I think I've kind of covered what I wanted to cover today. I'm still new to live, to LinkedIn live stream, and I'm just kind of trying to work out how I see who is in the room and how I can engage in more conversations. So just bear with me while I do that. Okay. Right. Okay. So I'm not sure that I can I'm quite there yet with this. But so I'm going to end it there. I'm going to end it there for now. And hopefully, as I said, I hope I'll get a lot more skilled at using LinkedIn live stream. But for now, it really was that kind of that first introduction in terms of, supporting you to understand some of the key concepts within my book, and to really kind of invite you to go on that journey with me in terms of identifying, where you are within the 6 stages framework, in terms of identifying how your biases show up on the prejudice, racism, equity spectrum, and in terms of understanding how you can challenge those biases. So let's see. I think I can see that there are 8 people currently on the live stream. But I'm trying to work out how I kind of get people involved in the conversation. But for now, it doesn't seem like I'm going to be able to do that for now, but please do message me. Let me know what you thought of my first LinkedIn live stream. Let me know what you'd like me to cover in future live streams. And let me know what your thoughts are in terms of the 6 stages framework and also the prejudice racism spectrum. Okay, so I'm going to end it there. Thanks so much for joining me on this first LinkedIn live stream. I'm sorry I've not been able to kind of work out the logistics of how I get people engaged in the conversation, but I will be working on that, and hopefully we'll be able to have more conversations soon. Thanks very much for joining me. Bye.